The Georgia Memory Network really builds upon existing resources from federal, state, and private funding. This includes the area agencies on aging, as well as adult disability and resources centers, where hopefully these centers will help them develop individualized protocols and processes for managing patients within different families. This also includes the Alzheimer's Association, which provides multiple caregiver tools, both in an online format as well as local support groups that are often near to families, but families may just not be aware of their existence. Similarly, private organizations such as the Rosalind Carter Institute can provide existing caregiver training plans and networks that would help with caregiving for families. Also, in general, the Georgia Memory Network is trying to help coordinate these different care services and make them available to not only the patients and caregivers, but how well that they will integrate in with the primary care provider and the type of services that they will be providing for the patients as they move through this journey. The role for the primary care provider is to really be aware of the services that are available locally and to provide supportive medical care for patients based on recommendations from the Georgia Memory Network. Some parts of the Georgia Memory Network plan may require primary care provider endorsements, and this could include managing different safety concerns such as with driving, managing medications, perhaps even finances, or instituting other local protocols that can help improve the safety of both the patient and the caregiver. The Georgia Memory Network provides all types of information to families and patients about Alzheimer's disease. The disease itself is often global in nature, affecting multiple aspects of a patient's life. This can include their ability to interact in the home environment, as well as their ability to respond to certain situations. Some of these may be emotionally charged and challenging to manage. One of the things to recognize is that Alzheimer's disease is a progressive process and will often last for 8 to 10 years or perhaps longer. A question that we often get from families is, well, what can be done about Alzheimer's disease? Unfortunately, we don't have any what we call disease-modifying therapies at this point in time that would actually stop the underlying disease process. There are some symptomatic therapies that have modest effect. There are also some other medications that can be helpful when trying to control different issues with mood or perhaps behavior. But in general, there is a significant challenge at this point with having medications that will help with the underlying disease. People with Alzheimer's disease are often still very capable of managing many of the activities of daily living, and it's often up to caregivers to identify which aspects of their daily life they can still manage. One of the challenges is finding the balance between safety and helping them act independently with certain activities. Caregivers are often tasked with doing this. Caregivers will often neglect their own care as they are managing patients with Alzheimer's disease. They're often assuming additional roles which they may not have managed throughout the previous part of their life. This can include things such as local activities around the home, or finances, or perhaps managing more with medications. It can also assume larger roles in really trying to manage the patient as they're moving throughout the day. This can often take a very large toll on caregivers, and we need to be mindful of how this impacts both their mental health and physical health as they're caring for their loved one. This is something that the GMN tries to stress when they're working with patients and caregivers so that they can understand that this burden is there. There's often an amount of social isolation that can occur not only with the patients but also with caregivers as they are spending most of their time dealing with their loved one rather than being out and about with others. The GMN tries to provide this extra information and resources that can assist these families in making the best decisions for their loved one. One of the other challenges that we see is that families and caregivers will sometimes not necessarily agree on what's the best course of action or the best plan of care for their loved one, and this can inject additional stress into the situation. And so it's helpful to really be mindful of how to navigate that best as they move forward in time. Caring for a patient with Alzheimer's disease can also be difficult from a social isolation perspective. Often we see that caregivers or families will remove themselves from other aspects of their life as they're trying to manage care for their loved one. And so we'll often have to identify novel strategies that can help those caregivers assume a regular life while still finding the best care for their patients and loved one.